even entering the space, I didn't really understand the true value and the true tradability or liquidity of gold until several years later. Being 18 though, I was young. You think you're 18 going on 40, but you're not really. So I learned a lot of really good lessons. But the industry itself is a really old industry. It does have an old boys club kind of feel to it in many ways. But thankfully for me, what it also meant is there hadn't been a huge amount of innovation, and there hadn't been a huge amount of digital adoption. There hadn't been a lot of collaboration. So for me, it was a really great chance to, I've often talked about it where I've sort of gone, help them go from using typewriters to using, a smartphone and do, you really got the chance to help them make a leap that was actually enormous compared to what most industries, some of these leaps are really small, but in the gold industry, it was a big leap.
Welcome to AlgoHQ. I am your host, Karel, here with Michael Cotton, the founder of Meld Gold and AlgoMint. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very kindly. Thanks for having me, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure. So can you tell me a little bit about Meld Gold and how it introduced you into the Algorand ecosystem?
Yeah, of course. So I sort of started looking at crypto quite a long time ago now, I guess, in the history of crypto. But in about 2016, 2017, we were looking at launching Meld Gold into the blockchain space. We had been looking for a number of years, but I wasn't in love with the tech. I saw issues for the future in terms of functionality, usability, gas fees, times. And I wasn't absolutely confident with the solutions actually coming to fruition. We've been waiting for things to happen for a long time. A lot of promises over the years were made about what was actually going to change. And we really hadn't seen that happen. And the issue is with gold, it's a little bit different. If we're physically storing gold, we're paying storage and insurance and we're acting as a custodian. If there's faults in the digital representation, it creates long-term issues that we have to manage because, a great example is if you end up with fractions of a grams of gold in crumbs spread across thousands of wallets of leftover from transactions and the gas fees outweigh the value, those crumbs are going to stay out there in the ecosystem forever, and we've got to store and insure them for life. So for us, it was a bigger problem than for most people. And then Apollo Capital, which is a fantastic fund here in Australia, a really great team. They introduced me to Ashley Milne, AJ, who came on to become the GM of Meld Gold. And he'd actually studied it under Silvio Micali at MIT. So the first thing we said is, let's look at some of the blockchain techs. Let's look at where the tech's at and what we could actually utilize. And of course, being from where he was, he instantly said, look, you need to have a look at Algorand, have a look at the tech, see what they're doing. And I started digging into Algorand, love the tech, really love what they were doing. It was kind of one of those sort of light bulb moments. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool. I spoke to Apollo. They had actually been a seed investor. They loved the project as well. So they sort of said, look, they're definitely, it's fantastic. There's no flaws that we can sort of pick in the tech. So we teed up a meeting with one of the head of engineering and some of the other team. And just got along with the team really well. They sort of just fit everything that I had sort of hoped to get from them is exactly what they were offering, which was great. And the team were awesome too, like just such a great team, really great guys, really useful, really helpful, really supportive, which is great too, because it makes it so much easier to build and participate when you're working with good people. So that was our first step to go, okay, yeah, look, we've found our home. This is where we should actually, start to build and where we should look to for the future.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Algorand is the place you want to go if you want transactions unhindered by gas fees and network clogging and scalability. So my question really is, if you take a physical and very historical store of wealth like gold, with all these different systems built around it to protect it and distribute it and keep it safe, how difficult is it to convince that world to jump into something so fresh and uncharted like blockchain?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. And, the good part, I think, is that, where I sort of see gold going for the future is, as much as it's an investment vehicle, I think one of the only alternatives as a stable coin to fiat is something like gold, which means, if we have this belief that the fiat system is flawed, which is certainly something that I strongly believe, I think with that in mind, I think the only sort of option we've got for the future in terms of a really solid stable coin, especially when you keep in mind that, a majority of the planet earn a living wage, they don't have the luxury of volatility. It's not really an option that they can afford to participate in something volatile. What it means is gold can really stand as a fantastic asset class for that stable global currency. So with that in mind, the benefit for the traditional gold world is gold's adoption digitally as a currency represents a truly strong future for gold as an asset in the new digital economy. But what it also opens up in terms of the crypto space is yield farming. It opens up the ability to actually generate a return on gold, which is almost a non-existent option within the traditional space. And that's what we're really seeing as probably one of the really valuable components is once you can actually earn a return on gold, we also do silver and platinum. Once you can actually start generating a yield or an APY on these assets, that incentive to go, all right, I've got 100 kilos of silver in a vault, I'm paying 0.75% a year to store and insure them, or I can digitize them and generate an actual return on my metal as well as holding my position. That really changes the narrative. And I think it's that incentive that's really going to drive a lot of adoption from the traditional gold industry.
So how do you take something so physical and generate yield in a digital way on it? Can you go a little bit more in depth in that? Because obviously it'll involve some type of lending out of the value of the gold or the asset or the silver or the platinum, and your Meld Gold token can be exchanged for real metals in real life. Is that true?
Yeah, so I probably to give you some insight into what the actual ecosystem looks like. So we were one of the very first projects to launch on Algorand. We were really early to the ecosystem, which for us was okay. We don't have any qualms with being first. I think we always were aware that we backed an incredible tech. So being first was more exciting than a hindrance for us. But it really gave us also time to really work on the physical ecosystem, because that's a really important part of what we're building. And so for those who don't know, Meld Gold is really about creating the digital standard. It's not about building a product for us. It's about creating a digital standard that any gold industry participant can join and be a part of. So obviously there's a lot of checks and balances and a lot of procedures to actually be a part of the ecosystem. But the overall concept was to create this decentralized holding of gold worldwide in independent locations to act as this physical banking network, with the idea that you can come deposit metal, withdraw tokens, bring back tokens, withdraw metal, and really create a banking network that was independent, decentralized, both physically and digitally, for this next generation of financial freedom. I think what what it means in terms of the actual earning yield side is one of the most difficult parts with gold in terms of utilizing the value within the metal, because in reality, if you've got USD, you can go and do things with it. If you've got other assets, you can do things with it. But with gold, if you wanted to go to the bank and get a loan, for example, they don't want to hold your gold. They don't want to try and put it in a vault somewhere and store it and look after it. They also don't want you to have it at home because they have no security over it. So it's a funny asset in terms of it has a lot of value and a lot of understood value and a lot of accepted value, but actually utilizing the value in it is really difficult. So digitizing it in a custodian method via something like Meld means that, one, you can create a trusted representation of the gold where parties like banks or the new generation lenders we're seeing in crypto can actually grab the digital assets, can take them from you, give you a loan, or pay you interest on that asset. So, platforms like BlockFi, platforms like Celsius, they offer interest on assets like this. So, at the moment, it's about 6% APY, which is actually on gold, going from paying 0.75% a year or 0.5% a year to earning 6%, is a whole different kettle of fish. But on top of that, there's also not the risk of necessarily lending out the assets. The new generation of yield farming is really around putting the assets to work. So, a great example is, I know you're aware, there's plenty of DEXs coming into the Algorand ecosystem, which is super exciting. And in theory, we'll see yield capabilities via providing liquidity and providing that kind of traditional style of asset usage into those ecosystems to generate a return as well. So I think that'll be quite interesting as that starts to develop a little bit further.
So when you talk about putting an asset to work, gold can be used in actual physical electronics. It can be, obviously made into artwork, but let's talk about electronics, like practical uses. How do you incorporate gold being used in practical ways with Meld, because just for the audience, I'm going to elaborate what I'm thinking. If the metal is in a vault, and you want to lend it out, and then somebody wants to come along and use it, does gold work that way? Do people go to vaults and then put that in the electronics, or do they mine it and purely bring it out for electronics?
Yeah, look, it's both is probably the short answer. The probably main thing to understand is if it's got a digital token attached to it, it can't leave the ecosystem. So it couldn't be given out to an electronics company, for example, to utilize. But in terms of the source for those companies, it really does vary from whether they're buying freshly mined gold or to whether they're buying recycled gold or whether they're buying gold that's been stored as in vaults for 100 years. It really is more to do with supply and where supply is available with whoever they actually have a strong deal with. We actually have a really strong focus on recycled gold. So a lot of our early initiatives was based around recycled gold. My other company here in Australia, it's one of the largest gold recyclers in the country. So we have a really strong tendency towards recycled gold versus newly mined gold. I think where the newly mined gold area really fits in for us as a company is, a big part of the ecosystem, and I can ramble a bit, so apologies if I end up going on for 20 minutes about the gold industry, but but where it really fits for the future is the actual Meld ecosystem. One of the really powerful components as to why the gold industry would want to adopt is we've digitized the entire supply chain. So what it means is at the moment, if you're a small gold recycler in country Australia in the middle of nowhere, you can access the power of, the world's largest gold traders and refiners, something that was, genuinely impossible for 99.9% of the world's gold businesses. So we connect to the entire supply chain. We automate the hedging, we automate all the insurance, we automate the logistics mapping, we automate the best path for that gold to take to be the most efficient path, which is really incredibly useful to anyone in the industry, but it's also what's needed in order for gold to become a currency, because in reality, if it is to be a currency again, it needs to have velocity and low cost capability on all levels. Because if it becomes expensive to move, it becomes expensive to transact in, it becomes expensive at any part of the supply chain, the ability for it to be traded at low cost in terms of between its value and its tradability really undermines being able to buy a coffee with it or buy a house if it's going to cost you a large fee. So we really are focused on that side. But what that means for the future in terms of mining, is the ability to connect small scale miners, in countries like PNG, in Africa, with the idea that you can really incentivize them to mine in different ways. Because one of the really big issues with a lot of mining in smaller countries particularly is a lot of the methods used aren't great, both for themselves and for the environment. But
Definitely.
the prices they get aren't great because it goes through 5 middlemen. But the ability to remove those middlemen, give them a higher return where they could also afford to mine in better ways, is a really interesting part of where I think we could end up in the future, which would be fantastic. It'd be a great solution to a genuine problem that's out there in the world now.
So how do you get rid of the middlemen? Let's say they bring it out of the ground and you got to get it somewhere safe. So it's not easy for miners to really do that whole process by themselves. So how do you really remove those middlemen?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. The big thing with the middleman is a lot of it's less to do with the actual transportation. Exactly. A lot of it's more to do with consolidation and funding. That's a really big part. So generally, there'll always be a central piece that is like the funnel, and there'll be lots of small pieces feeding into that funnel. The big thing with that funnel is the funnel exists mostly because people aren't aware of what they can actually access, or they don't do enough volume to access it, or the end of the funnel, this central piece that actually is like the consolidator. It's too much work to deal with 100 small parties. And that middleman is the piece that actually absorbs that cost and brings that transaction to life, or it's too hard to complete KYCs for 100 individual party miners. So the idea of the Meld system is it actually automates all of that. It actually removes so much of the workload where we can streamline that process. So there is an education piece to be done, but in saying that, the nice part is we aren't educating with no incentive. The really strong incentive for a miner. And so I've been through Africa. I've been to a lot of the mines through Ghana. I've done a lot of the mines. I've been through PNG. So I've actually seen it firsthand. I've been there. And for most of them, that incentive and that drive to gain a better life is incredibly powerful. And the roadblocks aren't that large. It just requires someone like Mel to actually do the work to get us there.
So you're connecting miners with people who can take it off their hands without having all these other people being like, I know a guy who knows a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's slightly more it's more sophisticated than that in terms of the way it actually happens on the ground.
Yeah.
But if you sort of boiled it down, you could sort of present it in that kind of fashion.
That's what I'm here for, boiling things down, honestly. So how did you
Yeah.
get involved in the gold industry?
Yes, I actually started when I was 18. So I started straight out of high school. Had a very small amount of money, but decided that this was for me. I sort of don't know exactly why. I sort of pinpointed at something interesting. So I was a big coin collector as a kid. My grandmother was a really big coin collector, and I spent a lot of time with her. And gold coins were a big part of that. So it was quite sort of interesting to end up in the space. I actually, even entering the space, I didn't really understand the true value and the true tradability or liquidity of gold until several years later. Being 18 though, I was young. You think you're 18 going on 40, but you're not really. So I learned a lot of really good lessons. But the industry itself is a really old industry. It does have an old boys club kind of feel to it in many ways. But thankfully for me, what it also meant is there hadn't been a huge amount of innovation, and there hadn't been a huge amount of digital adoption. There hadn't been a lot of collaboration. So for me, it was a really great chance to, I've often talked about it where I've sort of gone, help them go from using typewriters to using, a smartphone and do, you really got the chance to help them make a leap that was actually enormous compared to what most industries, some of these leaps are really small, but in the gold industry, it was a big leap. So for me, I saw it as a real advantage. And so over the years, built the business up. So the company now, I still am the major shareholder in the gold company. It employs 60 staff here in Australia, Australia's highest security vault in the country for precious metal storage. So it's really gone on to be its own creature. But I don't work as much in that business. For me, it's all about blockchain. That's where I live and breathe these days.
You're just a dynamic guy. One thing happened, you're just on to the next. It's like that.
Look, I figure my wife often always says, that I wouldn't do anything else. It's kind of, I love it. So it's not like necessarily work for me. When you love doing it, it's a completely different thing.
Hell yeah. Totally agree. Now tell me about your other project, AlgoMint. Can you give me a rundown on that?
Yeah, for sure. So we love Algorand, we love the tech, but we started, really for me, I've always seen it as a multi-chain future. So we really started looking at the idea of, all right, Meld Gold, if it's going to be a global currency, we're going to really bring this back to the currency forefront. Accessing other ecosystems is a necessity for us. So originally we started looking at building a bridge for ourselves. It was really just building bridging technology to go into Ethereum and to go into Solana and go into other areas like Cosmos and Polkadot. And was really a sensible idea. We've got a lot of relationships with a lot of other projects in other ecosystems. A lot of them I poke constantly saying you need to build an Algorand, but in the meantime, we're also keen to joining in and participating with them in other ecosystems. So we started looking at that. We actually started talking to Algorand, and we more and more realized that look, if we're going to build a bridge, let's not just build it for ourselves. We should really be building a bridge for the ecosystem, both for Algorand and for other ecosystems, to really create a really easy way to move between different blockchain ecosystems. And at Algorand at the moment, there's another layer of importance, which is actually bringing equity into the ecosystem. With the DEXs coming to fruition, with things like, launch pads coming into market, with new projects wanting to launch, the necessity for there to be value pouring into the ecosystem from other ecosystems is really important in order for the tradability, for the liquidity, to also bring people out of Ethereum. We need to make it easy for them to access the Algorand ecosystem. So this was kind of a major piece that we went, okay, this really does make sense for us. This is something we do need to do. And that's when we started working towards building out the bridge for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we can do there. Very initially, it is really quite simple in the sense that we're bridging Ethereum and Bitcoin into the Algorand ecosystem for really obvious reasons. They're two major assets, so they're a really obvious choice to bring in first. I think though, long term, there's a lot of really interesting capability we really want to build out. We really want to build out some interesting trustless mechanisms. So Ledgermatic, who are a great project, Luke and Isaac run that project, awesome team, building on Algorand. They've developed a really cool product, but even talking to Isaac recently, he was talking about some of their tech in terms of the way they shard the certificates to actually have this trustless way to custody assets, which is some really interesting tech. So there's some really cool ideas on how we can create, again, this hybrid version of custody that has this really strong trustless element to it, which is really where we want the project to end up. But on top of that, there's some other really cool use cases that we sort of are working towards. So for example, we'll launch Wrap USD later in the year, but it won't be based on a single USD token. The idea can be you could bring HUSD, you could bring in USDT on Algorand, USDT on Ethereum, USDT on another blockchain, same with USDC, and actually issue a single standard of USD, which is useful in a few ways. One, it means you can enter with any USD within reason, any USD we've accepted and we've vetted, but it also means you can swap between USDs inside AlgoMint. So you can go, I've got USDC on Ethereum. I love Ethereum, but I've heard about how awesome Algorand is, and I want to actually get over to Algorand. You can really easily come into the Algorand ecosystem via AlgoMint into Go USD, our wrapped USD, or you could actually enter and swap into USDC in Algorand via AlgoMint. So there's some really interesting use cases in terms of just making that process really easy. But what we'll also see for the future, and we're sort of seeing it take place now, is that there's so many versions of different stable coins that it's also making it harder and harder. Like a great example would be any of the DEXs coming to Algorand. So they want to support, 10 USD tokens in the future, or would it be easier to have something like AlgoMint that consolidates, and that way you could accept one USD standard and anyone can actually wrap into that USD standard and not actually have to have this myriad of pairings on the exchanges, which means as well, especially if we're talking about pooled DEXs, there's greater liquidity because instead of having 3 different USD tokens spread across pairings with Algorand, for example, you can make it into one with deeper liquidity, which means there's going to be less slippage and less impermanent loss.
Well, what's the name for it? Go
USD. So we actually, for the names of the tokens, we looked at Algo USD, we looked at Algo BTC, but in reality, Algorand gives speed and velocity to any token. So, shortening to Go USD, Go BTC, we really liked it. Exactly. So,
Go USD.
Exactly. So we really liked it. So for us, it was like, yep, perfect. We found the name that we're going to run with. But the other big brilliance of consolidation and creating these kind of dies out of like for like coins is if you're a new project, a good example is if you are based in Africa, again, if you're based in PNG, as some of the countries I used before, and you want to launch a really easy on-ramp and off-ramp in a stable coin via, a trusted method in that country where you're making it easy for people to actually access the digital ecosystem.
Yeah.
Getting that USD token then accepted somewhere can be really difficult, let alone accepted in lots of places. Whereas if, for example, you could get it accepted at AlgoMint and you can prove that, it's a valid token that is properly supported and can be trusted, you can then access anything AlgoMint's accepted. You can also access the ability to swap into other USD tokens via that bridge. So, I think it really will be an interesting transition as we go from being really all about bridging to that ability about being able to swap between like for like tokens to access different ecosystems or access different on and off ramps.
So at first on AlgoMint, you'll have stable coins, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. Are you planning on bringing anything else? Chainlink, Compound, any other ERC-20 or whatever people want to bring? Will people be able to bring anything through AlgoMint and add it as liquidity to the Algorand ecosystem? Or are you taking it step by step?
It is step by step, and it is something where we do need to ensure we can actually bridge the token and it does fit with what we need to be able to achieve or in terms of being able to fit with regulations. I think the other really big piece, like we've had quite a few people ask me about, will we bridge NFTs? And don't get me wrong, we love the idea. We're a part of another project called Originals Only, which is an Algorand NFT project, which is actually going to have some really cool bridging technology for NFTs. But the big piece with NFTs is, what data is inside the NFT and what data needs to actually transition from one blockchain to the other. And that's the really difficult part, because if you have media embedded, if you've got hash code embedded, IPFS hosting, all that data has to actually transition from one token to the next to then mint onto a new blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's some things are easier than others. So NFTs probably not, unless it's something really straightforward that we could do.
Okay.
But definitely a whole range of tokens is the plan. The idea is to create that capability cross-chain for a whole range of tokens.
Great. So AlgoMint is a bridge. Does it also operate as a DEX? Will you be able to swap tokens for each other, or is it
Look,
purely bridge?
not in the sense that it would be a USD to algo, for example. It'll only be like for like in the same pool. So Go USD token might be backed by 6 USDs. You could actually swap between enter in one USD and exit in another, not necessarily enter in the or enter or exit in the wrap version. So that's a really interesting use case in the sense that if you want to swap big chunks too, and we're talking about Algorand really being a part of that future broader adoption. If we want to swap big chunks, if you want to swap $250,000 worth of USDC for USDT, for example, or even USDC on Ethereum to a USDT on or Go USD on Algorand, there is actually can be quite a high fee in terms of slippage. Like if you want to go and go USD to USD in almost any exchange and you want to do a large chunk, you do lose a fair bit in terms of slippage. If you want to do it on a DEX, it's even worse generally. So the ability to actually do that on a one-for-one with a small processing fee is actually a real use case. I think we'll see a lot more people actually utilizing.
So how is AlgoMint able to do that with such low slippage and basically no fee for the user? Where do y'all make revenue off this, or how do y'all benefit? Are you just giving this service out for free?
No. So the fee ranges from 0.1 to 0.2%, depending on the asset type you're doing. But I think the reason why it's so simple is there's not a calculation for value because you're doing a one-for-one like. So it's not like we're saying, you've got Algo and you've got USD and what is the transaction value at this time? Because it's one-for-one, you just have a set fee. There's no slippage, there's no movement in that price. It's a really simple transaction. And you're not burning through buy orders. When you go on any exchange, if you want to go a certain depth, you'll slip through all the buy orders. All of a sudden, by the time you finish your transaction, you've actually moved the price, which is a real problem when you're talking about trying to do it for stablecoins. So this is where this like-for-like swap with a small fixed fee actually becomes really useful.
Because then you'd have arbitrage problems and people would be like, we've seen sometimes when markets are swinging and stablecoins will, go up 10%. And it's like, wait, I thought this was supposed to be $1. Now it's $1.05. And like that,
Yeah.
what's happening here?
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some thoughts around as well how the pools will operate in terms of these custody pools, because the other pieces we want to make sure they've got a really good mixture in the pools because we need people to, we want that swapability to be useful. So we're also looking at really sort of interesting ways to balance a seesaw of fees in terms of that like-for-like swap. So if you're coming in with a coin that we don't have very many of, you might actually get a really cheap, almost non-existent fee to swap. Whereas if you're coming in with a coin that we've got a lot of in the pool, it might be slightly more expensive than usual because it's a token that the pool doesn't need as much. So we're looking at interesting mechanisms to make that sort of a really sort of automated balancing protocol as well to keep us with a really good variety. So we're always useful for that swap functionality.
That sounds lovely. Do you have a anticipated date of beta testing or launch for this product, AlgoMint?
Yeah, so we're about sort of 14 to 16 weeks for launch, so not too long away, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer. We're really keen to sort of launch in line with a lot of the other projects coming to market. The DEX is being a good example because, in reality, our assets are going to be really useful on the DEXs. BTC, ETH pairings will actually be really great to utilize. So, our plan is we're working closely with a lot of people in the ecosystem. And so our plan is to really be collaborating with them. And so we can all come to market and really start to build out the foundation for what is some exciting stuff for Algorand.
Very exciting. I have one more question for you.
Hit me.
In the war of the hedge against inflation, what's going to win, gold or BTC?
Look, I actually really like both assets. I think they're quite different. Like gold's a 5,000-year-old asset class. Like it's had 5,000 years of price discovery. That's why it has so much stability. It is also like incredibly spread. It is incredibly decentralized physically. Like it is literally majority of the world have some gold of some kind, whether it be jewelry or in their electronics. You could almost say almost everyone in the world has gold. Not quite, but it'd be pretty close. So it's a completely different story to where BTC has come from. And BTC natively, like depending on how familiar you are with the actual dynamics and the actual functionality of BTC, it was designed around the same triggers that gold natively has, which is, the scarcity, the limited supply. Over time, price of acquisition goes up, which is the price of mining going up in BTC. Like, it has a lot of the same elements that are meant to be price drivers for BTC. So they're actually quite similar assets. I think the really big difference is, again, going back to that use case of as a currency. Like, if you're on a living wage and you want to be sure you can pay the rent or buy the groceries, BTC volatility is a problem. That's a real issue for you, because if the next day your holdings have gone down 20% and all of a sudden you can't pay your rent or you can't buy enough groceries or whatever it happens to be, that's a real problem. So this is where gold has the stability to be really useful as that stable coin. And really, I sort of see it as a fantastic alternative to any of the fiats. Everything is priced in USD. It would be great if gold could actually take its place and be what products are priced in. The other really big part with gold is it is the most accepted currency in the world. So a lot of people don't realize, but gold is the only currency that, like for like, is the same value in every local currency of the world. So it's actually the most accepted currency because of that huge price discovery period and because of that diversification of holders. It is still the most accepted and trusted asset in the world. Like, I think today, if you went worldwide and said, here, you can have a little bit of BTC or a little bit of gold, I think you would still find that almost everyone would go, well, I know what I can do with the gold. I can, sell that. I trust that. I accept that.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a little bit of the difference as to why it suits that currency side. BTC represents a really fascinating investment component for the, at the moment. Like, it does have some really long-term issues, around that. We've seen it in recent times, the cost of transacting, the time for transacting, the certainty.
Yeah.
You can't buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin natively. Like, it just can't be done. It's an impossible task unless you're willing to pay an insane gas fee and wait an hour at the cafe for them to clear the transaction. This is, funnily enough, this is where AlgoMint actually provides something interesting, because, you could buy a coffee with Algorand wrap BTC. You could stand there and you could tap. Exactly. So, we're really keen on AlgoMint also being a powerful component for payment processing, because, it'd be great to see BTC and other similar assets actually being paid and used over the counter. Would be fantastic. And I think it's a really strong use case that Algorand can really stand at the front of, because also being a really institutional blockchain, in reality, payment gateways for a long time coming are going to be controlled by KYC methods. It's a reality of the space. So having things like Algorand providing that support in terms of the tech make a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And the more people start spending crypto at their local mom and pop shop, that's actually how it may start to get to the level of acceptance of gold, where you can give someone gold, they know it's valuable, like you said. But if you can't give someone Bitcoin, and if you try to not everyone's going to take it anyway. They're going to be like, what can I do with this? I'm going to need to trade it. I'm going to need to go on. KYC, go on an exchange, set up your whole account, set up your bank account with it. Like, there's still 3 or 4 layers of hindrance that make it inaccessible to a lot of people in developing countries.
Completely agree. And I also think, Algorand does answer so many of the current problems. I feel like if you talk to someone who's not initiated to the space, some of their first things are, oh, it's really environmentally bad. Blockchain's terrible for the environment. Or, oh, I heard it costs a fortune to do a transfer. How could you ever buy something? Which is funny. Like, Algorand really, whether it be in native Algorand form, whether it be Meld Gold, or whether it be wrapped token, it really answers all of those problems. And does it in a way that is also, Silvio did an incredible job in terms of solving that trilemma. And that it was a big thing, because traditionally it would be kind of picking two. We've got our 3 fundamentals of what you could sort of choose from, and you would have to pick 2. He did an incredible job of really harnessing the power of all 3 elements, which is why I think it's such a fantastic blockchain for the future. And I think that this next sort of 3 years is when, especially now with this foundational components of the ecosystem coming to fruition, we're going to see a lot more work being done and building out in the space.
Definitely agree. I'm excited for that. I'm very excited for that.
For sure. And you probably saw that Arrington announced their $100 million fund yesterday. Did you see that?
I did see that. What do you think of that? Are you going to try to tap into any of that for AlgoMint, or do you not need it?
Look, we know the guys. We know the guys really well. They're massive Algorand supporters. You know, they're really open about they've reinvested in Algorand constantly. So I think it's a great team to go to because I think they have such a great support and long-term vision for Algorand. So I think with them sort of focusing energy on investing in products in the space, I think is fantastic. You know, I think they'll help bring a lot of new products and support and empower a lot of new products projects coming to market, which will be great.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. Absolute
pleasure
to have you. What an informative conversation. Thank you so much.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you kindly. And I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
For sure.